The ghosts of Highway 20 refer to a number of individuals who disappeared or were victims of rape and murder along Highway 20 in the US state of Oregon from the late 1970s to the early 1990s. John Arthur Croyd was raised in the small logging town of Sweet Home, Oregon. His father worked as a maintenance worker and his mother as an office worker at the police department in Sweet Home. He had an older and a younger sister. During his school years, he was a loner who was bullied. His high school diploma indicated that he had been a special education student. He enlisted in the army after having been accused of felony theft. He worked overseas as a mechanic and was caught stealing equipment. In 1977, he began working for the Oregon Department of Transportation, called the State Highway Department at the time, along US Route 20 that ran east to west across Oregon. He was responsible for clearing wrecks, helping people whose cars broke down on a highway, and maintenance. He married Linda Pickle in the mid-1980s. She had 2 children, Rakanda and Byron. They lived at Santiam Junction, a state highway division compound at the junction of an Oregon 126, Oregon 22, and US Highway 20. Other highway workers lived there, but there were few children. After 1 year, the couple divorced, but they continued to live together with Linda's children. John Arthur Ackroyd, a highway mechanic with the Oregon Department of Transportation, was a suspect in these cases. Detectives were able to prosecute the murder of Kay Turner of 1978, for which he was sentenced to 5 life sentences for aggravated murder. Ackroyd pleaded no contest in the murder of his stepdaughter Rakanda Pickle and agreed to not seek parole for the murder of Turner. A case was developed against Ackroyd for the murders of Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson, but Ackroyd died before the case could be presented to the Lincoln County, Oregon grand jury. Marlene Gabrielson was the only known victim to have lived and is the first known victim. Her case was not prosecuted. In the late spring of 1977, 20-year-old Marlene Gabrielson went to Sisters, Oregon for the rodeo with her husband. The rodeo was 90 miles from their home in Lebanon and was her first night out since she had given birth to her baby girl 3 months earlier. She and her husband got in a disagreement and he wanted to split off with some friends. Marlene wanted to go back home. John Arthur Ackroyd gave her a ride, during which she fell asleep. 1 hour later, he pulled up the highway onto an old wagon road. He held a knife to her neck and dragged her into the woods where he ripped off her jeans, cut off her underwear and boots with the knife. He then raped her after she pleaded to be taken to her home and her baby. He decided to drive her to her mother-in-law's house in Lebanon. Gabrielson was careful to preserve evidence and asked for the police to be called. She described him as someone big and burly who may have worked in the woods. Although the evidence, including the rape kit and her bruised body, supported her story, the police did not prosecute Ackroyd. She was interviewed again after other women and girls went missing or were killed. She is believed to have been Ackroyd's first victim. Kay Turner spent the Christmas holiday of 1978 with her husband and their friends at Camp Sherman, Oregon in Central Oregon. Kay, 35, and her husband were from Eugene, Oregon. She was Staff Resources Manager of the Lane County Office of Community Health and Social Services. That year, Turner completed marathons and climbed 3-Fingered Jack and Mount Washington. On Christmas Eve, she went on a run by herself before breakfast at about 8:15 a.m. She embarked on a run expected to take 1 hour along a 2-lane camp road. Thomas Hanna, a state highway worker who lived at Camp Sherman, spotted her running south, and he also saw another highway worker, John Ackroyd. Her husband Noel Turner drove through Camp Sherman looking for his wife when she had not returned by M, fearing his wife had been kidnapped. He phoned the police and a search was organized. The police originally suspected Noel in his wife's disappearance due to her extramarital affairs with some men. They interviewed Ackroyd, who got off of work at 6:30 a.m. He was based in Santiam Junction, Oregon, and drove to Camp Sherman, about 25 miles from work. He said that he planned on hunting coyotes. Ackroyd mentioned that he had seen a runner in a clearing, but the police did not consider him a suspect. During the searches for Turner, 2 sets of footprints were found in the frozen stove. One matched Turner's Nike shoes. The other set was consistent with footprints of a large man. The scene indicated that there had been a scuffle and a smaller person being dragged away. In August 1979, a Croyd reported that he had found Turner's remains in the woods, about a half-mile of the road that she had been running along. She had been kidnapped, raped, and killed. Police were surprised that a Croyd had claimed the remains were of Kay Turner, because little was found of her besides scraps of her clothes and scattered bones. He also said that he was the last person to see her. Over time, he disclosed that he talked with her before picking up another man, Roger Dale Beck, who was a friend and fellow hunter who lived in the Camp Sherman area. Croyd said that he saw her remains 2 months after her disappearance, but did not report the sighting. It was not until Croyd's stepdaughter, Rakanda Pickle, went missing in 1990 that the police began to earnestly investigate Croyd and collect new information. Croyd and Beck were indicted by a Jefferson County grand jury and arrested in 1992. Croyd was convicted in October 1993 of aggravated murder in the rape, murder and shooting of Turner, for which he received a life sentence. Beck, who bragged to his family about killing Turner, was also found guilty in November 1993 of the aggravated murder of Kay Turner by a Jefferson County Circuit jury at a separate trial. Testimony from Beck's ex-wife, Pam Ramirez, and new forensic testing are credited with helping prosecute the case. Jefferson County District Attorney Bill Hanlon said that Croyd had tried to get the reward for finding Turner. If he had been silent, this case would have gone nowhere. 13-year-old Rakanda Pickle was the daughter of Linda Pickle, who married Croyd in the mid-1980s. They lived at Santiam Junction at Oregon 22, US Highway 20, where state highway work crews lived. The area is remote, and there were no children her age there. She was bused to school. Croyd was physically and sexually abusive to her. One day, Rakanda was left at home alone. Croyd decided to take the day off, and he returned home in the morning. She was never seen again. A massive search was conducted by 100 police officers from 7 counties, but was unsuccessful in finding any leads to Rakanda's disappearance. Assumed to be dead, searches for her continued into 1993. After compiling evidence, including a number of interviews, police arrested Croyd and he was charged with Rakanda's murder in April 2014. He entered a plea deal. According to Linn County District Attorney Dirk Martini, his office reached a deal with Byron Pickle, the victim's brother, that placed the prosecution of the murder on hold in a manner that would ensure that Mr. Croyd would remain in prison until his death. Croyd pleaded no contest and agreed not to seek parole, meaning that he would die in prison. Melissa Sanders, 17, and Sheila Swanson, 19, had been on a camping trip at Beverly Beach State Park with the Sanders family in the spring of 1992. The girls became bored and had decided to hitchhike. When the Sanders woke in the morning, the girls were gone and presumed to have had friends bring them back to Sweet Home. The girls lived inland off of Highway 20, where they frequented a Sherry's restaurant. Croyd, who was also a frequent customer at the restaurant, was suspected to have been involved in their disappearance. The night of the girls' disappearance, Croyd had returned to the state highway shop in Sweet Home covered in blood, which he stated belonged to a deer he had encountered and had to gut out. When asked what happened to the deer's carcass, Croyd said that he had thrown it in the brush near where he worked along Highway 20 between the coast and Sweet Home. Local hunters found Sanders and Swanson's bodies near an old logging spur off of Highway 20. They were among a number of women and girls who disappeared along Oregon's coast. 5 teens disappeared from Lincoln County on Oregon's coast alone between 1984 and 1995. Melissa and Sheila's bodies were found about a month before Croyd was charged for the murder of Kay Turner. Croyd declined to be interviewed by the police in the Sanders and Swanson case. There was no forensic evidence that tied Croyd to the murder of the girls, but investigators found that Croyd had met them earlier and offered them a ride. They also learned that he had once invited them to a party that he said he was hosting near Newport and the campground that they stayed at in 1992. Croyd was also seen 3 times near where the girls' bodies were found on a logging road off of Highway 20. Ron Bengtson, an investigator for the Lincoln County District Attorney's Office, connected the cases of Marlene Gabrielson in 1977 with the case of Kay Turner in 1978, as well as the disappearance of Ackroyd's stepdaughter, Rakanda, in 1990, and Melissa and Sheila's murders in 1992. Police reopened the 1992 case in 2012 with Bengtson and Linda Snow investigating. Bengtson determined that there were similarities between the disparate cases and evidence against Ackroyd, such as the killer not having buried victims' remains, Ackroyd taking time off around the time of the crimes, and the connection to wildlife and hunting in his statements about what he was doing at the time of the crimes. Investigators located the men who had seen Ackroyd arrive very late after his shift and covered in blood. They then had enough evidence for a grand jury. Since Ackroyd was already in prison and it would be expensive to prosecute the case was closed. Police have tied the 4 homicide and 1 assault and rape cases to Ackroyd, and also believe him to have been responsible for the deaths of a number of other people in the area at the time he was suspected to have been active. A moss hunter in Linn County at Sweet Home, Oregon discovered the unidentified skeletal remains of a woman on July 24, 1976, along Highway 20 close to Swamp Mountain Road. Ackroyd is the prime suspect in her presumed murder, but her identity still remains unestablished, and she is referred to by authorities as the Swamp Mountain Jane Doe. 14-year-old Rodney Lynn Grissom and 15-year-old Karen Jean Lee were last seen in 1977 in Cornelius, Oregon on May 24th and 26th respectively. Authorities believe Grissom left with Lee intending to hitchhike to California, only to disappear 2 days after taking off. The 2 teens called a friend from a payphone in Lebanon, Oregon after leaving home, which was cut short when Karen said, "Our ride is here, I have to go." Karen and Rodney were never seen again. Later that year, in Linn County, Oregon, close to Highway 20, some of the couple's possessions were discovered. The items included Rodney's watch and some of his other belongings, along with Karen's trousers, some notebook pages, and a blouse that she had made. Karen's jeans looked like they had been cut. Elizabeth Muscle, 22, vanished in downtown Lebanon in the summer of 1977. The following year, her bones were discovered in a shallow grave in the woods near Green Peter Reservoir's Thistle Creek exit on Highway 20 in Linn County. On April 27, 1978, another unidentified woman's skull was found in a wooded area of US Route 20 in eastern Linn County, Oregon. It was initially speculated that this decedent was the missing woman Karen Lee, but this was eventually ruled out. The victim remains unidentified and is known by authorities as the Linn County Jane Doe. On August 27, 1978, at a.m., 2 men from Milton Freewater, Oregon were hunting in the Finley Creek cow camp close to Elgin when they came across skeletal remains at a nearby grave. The remains were spread around, and the skull appeared to be sticking out of the grave. She had been buried face down in the shallow grave. She was also pregnant, and estimated to have been in the 6th to the 8th month of her pregnancy. She is known as Finley Creek Jane Doe. In 1986, 2 Forest Service workers found a partial human skull, some additional bone fragments, and 1 tooth near Government Camp off US 26 on Mount Hood in Clackamas County, Oregon. The skull was not identified at the time until when the Oregon State Medical Examiner's Office got a grant to begin DNA analysis on more than 100 sets of unidentified human remains, including the Mount Hood skull. Genealogical investigation and DNA testing on the skull identified Wanda and Hare, age 19, as a potential match. Authorities were able to identify her by finding her living sisters. When Hare vanished in June 1976, she was residing in a group home in Gresham, Oregon. As no missing persons report had been made at the time, it was assumed that she had been a runaway. Investigators Ron Bengtson and Linda Snow with the Lincoln County District Attorney's Office were preparing to present the evidence against Ackroyd for the murders of Swantz and Sanders to the grand jury when Ackroyd passed away in 2016. The Oregonian newspaper and others have alleged that Ackroyd was involved in the murder of several more women. Aykroyd was incarcerated in Oregon State Penitentiary, where he passed away in 2016.